If you have been following the Lucy Letby case, then you will have seen that the former Assistant Chief Constable for Hampshire has come out with a blistering criticism of Cheshire Police's handling of the case. This builds on a more mild level of criticism which he directed at the investigation in an interview with John Sweeney last year. Last year, he discussed the possibility of Cheshire police officers being charged with perverting the course of justice.
If it was done deliberately, then it may give rise to consideration of a conspiracy to pervert the course of justice.
He was referring there to the decision by Cheshire Police to sack Professor Jane Hutton after they received negative feedback on the handling and direction of their investigation. At that point in time, he describes the idea that Cheshire Police perverted the course of justice as a remote possibility. In his most recent interview with The Telegraph, Dr. Steve Watts appears to have stepped up his level of criticism, though at this point in time, he sounds more critical of the competence rather than the integrity of the investigation. Picking out some quotes from Dr. Watts in his interview with The Telegraph, he says, quote, "The material before the court, in my view, was obtained by an investigation that was unconsciously skewed by confirmation bias. At a very early stage, it appears that Cheshire Police decided these children had been injured deliberately and that Lucy Letby had done it. I find it difficult to call it an investigation. It seemed that it was more an information gathering exercise to prove that Lucy Letby did it." Dr. Watts also says in the article, quote, "There are a number of other hypotheses of how these babies died. I always reminded my officers not to believe anything. Belief is not a matter for the police. It is crucial that the hypothesis and conclusions are based on cogent evidence. Assume nothing, believe nobody, check everything should be a key principle," close quote. This quote couldn't be more relevant to the Lucy Letby case. I've mentioned before on this channel that Dr. Ravi Jayaram has now been reported to Cheshire Police on suspicion of perjury and perverting the course of justice. There's a perception by some that this relates solely to an email which appears to directly contradict his under oath trial testimony. In reality, there's more to the grounds for an investigation, which involves a lurid and striking description of an incredibly rare rash, which was so striking that Dr. Jayaram didn't record it in his notes for 2 years, as well as other details such as withheld evidence of incompetent ventilator setup. It has also been reported in Private Eye that Dr. Stephen Breary has been reported on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter and perverting the course of justice for matters relating to this needle insertion.
The needle perforated the liver. The baby was still being ventilated with a needle in the liver. The liver was now being lacerated by the needle.
The credibility of the idea that the needle injury actually happened has been disputed, partly because fellow defence experts weren't completely clear on the issue.
Was blindly inserted into the abdomen to try and relieve the abdominal distension. Well, this is something you don't do, and you don't do blindly. And unfortunately, this may have penetrated the right lobe of the liver.
The credibility of this theory was bolstered by a revelation in the Lucy Letby case, Part 32 in Private Eye, which showed that Dr. Sandy Bowen, forming her own independent conclusions, was in fact the first individual to describe this needle insertion. Reading through it, quote, "I suggest an alternative causation for the subcapsular hematoma/liver trauma be explored, i.e. could this be iatrogenic trauma secondary to attempts at decompressing the abdomen with a cannula?" Even though Dr. Bowen flagged this as a possibility in one of her early reports, for some reason she disregarded this during the trial and when questioned under oath. I've mentioned before on this channel that Dr. Bowen was reported to Cheshire Police on suspicion of perverting the course of justice. Despite Dr. Bowen being flagged to Cheshire Police as a potential criminal, a recent report by The Telegraph suggests not only did they not investigate this complaint, in contrast they doubled down and signed an extension to Dr. Bowen's contract. Reading through the Telegraph article, Letby's lawyers raised fresh doubts over credibility of key witness. The writer says, quote, If new charges are brought against the former nurse, Dr. Bowen will probably take the stand again. They then quote from Mark MacDonald, who says, quote, Dr. Bowen's importance cannot be underestimated. She was instrumental to the prosecution case at Lucy's trial, and she is critical to the ongoing police inquiry, close quote. So thinking back to Dr. Steve Watt's quote at the start of the video.
If it was done deliberately, then it may give rise to consideration of a conspiracy to avert the course of justice.
Drawing a diagram from their response to the crime complaint about Dr. Bowen from a senior paediatric consultant and medico-legal expert, they received news that Dr. Bowen might be a potential criminal, and they responded by essentially getting further into bed with this potential criminal by offering her a contract extension. I think by itself, the handling of the Dr. Bowen situation is unlikely to lead to a charge of perverting the course of justice. I expect Cheshire Police would argue the crime report was vexatious and/or came from an individual with a partial view of the case. Although Cheshire Police are probably loath to acknowledge it fits with a picture of other crimes being reported relating to the trial and indictment period. Taking a wider view of the case, I think some of those following it would say various elements of evidence could be pieced together to support a perverting the course of justice investigation into Cheshire Police. Dr. Steve Watts originally brought up the firing of Professor Jane Hutton. I think the handling of the crime complaint about Dr. Bowen makes Cheshire Police look bad. They could perhaps have justified not investigating, but signing a contract extension rather than hiring a new expert, in my opinion, makes them look very suspect. There are further issues with their handling of the statistical evidence.
Obviously, our evidence and statistical analysis showed that Lucy Letby was present at everything.
It's a big factor, I think, that if you look at this article, quote, Why the Letby Case Isn't Closed by David Rose, the initial statistical analysis is very different. The article mentions that in initial police analysis, Lucy Letby was not in the hospital for 10 out of 28 suspicious incidents. So these are what I think are the major police conduct issues with the investigation. If you can think of anything more major than the ones I've mentioned, please let me know in the comments. I'd like to turn attention now to Lucy Letby's second police interview, which was conducted, I think, by DS Daniel Stonier. In my opinion, there are some question marks over it. I don't want to monster DS Daniel Stonier at this point. There is evidence that Cheshire Police have been dishonest with Lucy Letby. That is a police conduct issue in my opinion, but it is not as serious, I think, as if they were being knowingly dishonest with victims. I guess that they felt entitled to be dishonest with Lucy Letby, as they believe she is a criminal, but by doing that they are undermining everyone's right to a fair investigation. There is an interview which the Daily Mail podcast did with DS Daniel Stonier, where she acknowledges that she interviewed Lucy Letby for her second and third police interview.
I was involved in the interview process for the interviews that took place in 2019 and then again in 2020.
So it sounds like this DS Daniel Stonier was involved in Lucy Letby's second police interview on 11th of July 2019. I don't know if she carried out the whole interview, but I'm going to get into some very factually dubious assertions that were made by Cheshire Police in that interview, which should have been at odds with other evidence they had gathered elsewhere. Reading through this exchange, the police interviewer says, quote, You were the only staff member in the nursery at the time Baby C collapsed as well, weren't you? Lucy Letby responds, yes. The police interviewer then says, yeah. And you were seen as cotside when his alarm sounded, weren't you? And Lucy responds, yeah. So I'm now going to read through a bit from nurse Melanie Taylor's cross-examination by defence lawyer Ben Myers, where he questions the nurse about her 2018 police statement, which was obviously before Lucy Letby's 2019 police interview. Defence lawyer Ben Myers puts it to the nurse, quote, The first thing it says is, when Baby C collapsed, I'm pretty sure I was in nursery 1 already. I think I was feeding another baby. Later on, it says, I remember being called over by Sophie at about 11:30. So remember, in the later police interview, they make the assertion Lucy Letby was alone with the baby when he collapsed. We see from nurse Melanie Taylor's police statement they had a witness identifying 2 other individuals in the nursery at the time of collapse. It doesn't end there though, because there is evidence the police had another witness statement testifying Lucy Letby was not alone with baby C at the time of collapse. Reading through Nurse B's cross-examination, Ben Myers says, quote, "You spoke to the police in 2018. Skipping forward, he then says, "As you've told us this morning, when you entered Nursery 1, you saw Sophie and Melanie near-puffing baby C." Nurse B responds, "That's my memory." Ben Myers then says, "And that's what you told the police in 2018. Nurse B then responds, "It is." So all in all, I think it was dishonest and inappropriate for whoever the police officer was who made the assertion to Lucy Letby that she was alone with baby C at the time when he collapsed. Lucy Letby did agree with it, but if you look at the rest of her testimony, that's because she has a very vague memory of events. The fact that she did agree with it, though, became the main thrust of the prosecution case. The failings of the police interrogation become more serious when you factor that there's an increasing swell of opinion that baby C was in fact the victim of gross negligence manslaughter perpetrated by the consultant in charge, Dr. John Gibbs. The other issue that I have personally with the DS Daniel Stonier interview are the moments where she describes Lucy Letby as cold and emotionless.
For me, there was little emotion.
When you look at the Lucy Letby mugshots on screen, you can see the real one on the right, which was obviously taken in police custody, and then you can see the other one on the left, which has been airbrushed and circulated in the media. In the mugshot on the right, it very much looks to me like she's been crying for a significant length of time, whereas the airbrushed mugshot loses that effect. So it seems to me that certain officers from Cheshire Police, and I wouldn't say DS Daniel Stonier is necessarily the worst offender, have been playing into a sort of cult of personality where Lucy Letby is depicted as this sort of cold and emotionless cyborg. It has been said that Lucy Letby was cold and emotionless during the court case, although when you look at the headlines that were coming out in the middle of the trial, that seems to be overstated. A difference is at the time of the court case, Lucy Letby was on sedatives and anti-anxiety medication. So all in all, in conclusion, it's long overdue in my opinion that the CCRC should refer the Lucy Letby case back to the Court of Appeal. I think it's also arguably past the point where the Independent Office for Police Conduct looked into Cheshire Police. From the information I have, a letter was sent to the Chief Constable flagging to them that Dr. Bowen is a potential criminal. They seem to have responded by offering her a contract extension and making her the lead medical investigator for what should have been the highly sensitive investigation into cases at Liverpool Women's Hospital.